All righty. Here we are, live and in person. It's Chris Haig filling in for David Paul Blumenshine. I appreciate everybody showing up and listening in. And I've got, I'll call her Tanya as opposed to Mrs. Producer because that's probably more accurate. So she's going to help me out in the background with a few things. And we're going to talk about a lot of issues today. We're going to talk about what some people call chaos, I call multitasking. We're going to talk a little bit about affordability, the definition of affordability, things like that, and how those are going to impact the race and what things Trump may need to do to improve his position and help himself out for the midterms. So one of the things we talked about yesterday was the war in the Middle East and how Iran was going to try and start mining the Strait of Hormuz. As you may know, the Strait of Hormuz is a 20-mile strait there that's borders on the on Iran, and so they have pretty good control over it if they have the wherewithal to do that. The U.S. military is doing everything they can to prevent them from doing that. And so they threatened that they were going to mine the ocean there, the strait, and stop everybody. So this is kind of the result of that. So I'll give you a show of that. And so I'm not as good with the monkey buttons as David is, so you may have some issues there. So for those who are listening, what we have is real time, well, not real time, but we have video unclassified of a number of these mine laying vessels being destroyed. And so they're out of the business. So one of the things that some of the people talk about is that, well, if they blow up the mine laying vessels, Iran has submarines, but the issue there is that the U.S. has ability to take care of the submarines as well as they did the mine laying vessels. So we're likely to see that fail. The other thing to note about that is that when the war started, let me unshare this. So when the war started, what we found out is that Iran's initial strategy was to flood the various countries with lots of missiles and hope that they would create chaos and cause those countries to force the United States to back off from their military, the military issue that they're doing. So what ended up happening is that in the first hours of the war, the United States took that ability away. So now they've had to move on to secondary strategies. And their secondary strategy is to close the Strait of Hormuz and cause oil prices to get to a price where, again, the Allies try and convince the United States to stop their military operations and move on to other things. So the idea that the Iran is focused on the Strait of Hormuz is actually a sign that they're losing. And it's only a matter of time before the United States is able to move on and take care of those things that they're doing in the Strait and reopen that up. We're thinking that that's probably a couple weeks off, though. So in the meantime, there'll be a lot of turmoil that goes on along the way. So on to the talking about the election that's coming up, the midterm. What we're going to see is likely a strategy that the Democrats employed in 2020, where they talked a lot about chaos and their definition of chaos, and they created riots along with the Rodney King issue. And so what's likely to happen is they're going to continue that process because it worked in 2020. And today they're going to use a different strategy with different topics, but it'll basically be the same sort of thing. In Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, he he wrote that I never get too attached to one deal or one approach. I keep a lot of balls in the air. And so if you've ever watched somebody juggling, what you'll notice is that it seems pretty chaotic. All those balls, they're working really hard, trying to keep everything up in the air, and it seems very chaotic. But if you know somebody who actually knows how to juggle, it's very, it's multitasking. It's not chaos. And so that is what Trump is actually able to accomplish. He's multitasking. He inherited from the Democrats a lot of really bad issues that he had to address. And so, the first one that he had to address was open borders. We allowed 12 to 20 million undocumented immigrants into this country. And some of them were not really the best people that we could get. So there's criminals out there that are creating havoc in our big cities. And so the first thing he had to do when it came to that was go out and try and stop that crime. And that crime means that you have to have law enforcement, and law enforcement is out arresting people. And the Democrats want you to believe that instead of arresting people with criminal backgrounds and people who shouldn't be here, that they're actually arresting U.S. citizens and going around their due rights process and sending them out of the country. That's all not true, but that's what they're going to try and tell the American public that's happening. The other thing that came about because of the open borders was we had a lot of fentanyl coming into the country. So there were hundreds of thousands of people every year dying from fentanyl overdoses. So that was another thing that Trump realized he needed to stop because lives were being lost. So he started looking at ways to, first of all, he closed the border. Then he also started looking at where is that flow of drugs coming from and how do I stop it? And some of it obviously is coming from Mexico, and Mexico decided that they would work with the United States. And so he left them alone. But Canada seemed to not be doing as much as they could. So he added tariffs on there. So the minute that he declared that there were tariffs, then the Democrats, of course, used the chaos card and started complaining about how the tariffs were going to cause great amounts of inflation and destroy the economy. So in the meantime, the economy has grown at a pretty decent 3.5% clip, and inflation has actually gone down from when he inherited the inflation rate from Biden in January of last year. The other thing that came about of that is that he realized that Venezuela was going to become part of this issue as well, because they're one of the big shippers of drugs, and they've been a thorn in the side of the United States for quite some time. In fact, Biden realized that Maduro was a problem and actually increased the bounty on him to be arrested, but never really did anything with that. And so that was another one where Trump had to actually do something about it. He went ahead and sent the U.S. military in and captured Maduro and brought him back to the United States to face charges for drug transportation. So, these are all things that were created out of failed policies from the Democrats, and now they're being fixed by Trump. And every step along the way, people call it chaos. So some people said, well, Trump ran on staying away from military interventions. And yes, he did run on that, but that didn't relegate him into allowing the world to just go crazy while he did nothing and sat on his hands. And so he's done that. When the other issue that he's been involved with, and we see this in the war in the Middle East, and last summer he also had military operation to take out some of the nuclear facilities of Iran. So we saw that was another, cleanup on aisle 5 that was left over from the Biden and Obama administration. As we know, Biden and Obama negotiated with Iran, gave them lots of money, and basically put them in a position so that they could continue developing their nuclear plan in secret. And so, of course, that's another thing that Trump has decided that he has to resolve. And part of that is this operation that he has going on in the Middle East right now. So again, more chaos, more military. For a guy that wanted to keep things quiet, he still ended up with all these military operations that he had to do. The other military operation that's ongoing is the war in Ukraine. That was another one that, through weakness, Biden encouraged or set the stage for Russia to be able to invade Ukraine. And so now Trump has to deal with that as well. So there's all these various things that Trump has had to deal with because the Biden and Obama administrations left them to fester. And so finally somebody had to clean them up. And all along, those things are what pundits are calling chaos, because it looks messy as you fix up the other problems, because that's just how the nature of that goes. Then Trump is now faced with other policies that Biden had left behind, such as flooding the economy with too many dollars. So after the economy started to recover from the COVID issue, then Biden decided to set another stimulus program, and out of that, inflation hit 9%, and we had terrible inflation for a long period of time, and all that's money spent. There was also increased regulation, focus on green energy projects, things that really had no payoffs in the past. And how do we know there were no payoffs for those green energy projects? Because the level of implementation is very slow. When you look at some of the other innovations, things like electricity, moving from steam engine to electricity, the project itself paid for itself. So it's self-financed. You didn't have to provide extra money to encourage people to do these things. They happened on their own. And because you have to pay for that, it's the implementation of these green energy projects is very slow. May take, the change is really slow because we had almost zero benefit out of it. We already had a quality energy distribution system, and now we're trying to replace it with a different one that really does the same thing. It's just using different products. And we've seen last week here, when we had this bad weather, some of the things that one of the weaknesses of that project, and I'll pull that up for you and give you,
they are shredded.
See here, if you get in, is you can see this is a solar farm in Indiana, and basically it was completely destroyed by the storm last Tuesday, and that's one of the weaknesses.
They are shredded.
That these solar and wind farms are subject to the weather, where things like coal plants and gas plants and nuclear plants are built to withstand those types of environments. So we're seeing that aspect. And so you're seeing higher electricity prices, and that's one of the things that's causing Trump to what's the pundits are calling more chaos. In addition to this, we're looking at the other issue that Trump is having to address is affordability. And the definition of affordability is whether you can afford something, and how that differs from inflation rate is that the affordability is basically the cumulative effect of inflation over a long period of time. And so the problem that Trump is facing is that he has to address all the problems that Biden caused when the inflation rates went up. And so what are we looking at? So the biggest three things that people are looking at when it comes to affordability is housing and the inability to afford housing. We have energy is another one that's causing people a lot of problems, and we're seeing that through electricity bills. And in Illinois in particular, you've seen the addition of batteries in your bills on a monthly basis. And so that's also gonna, the idea is that because these green energy producers like wind and solar, they're all dependent on the sun or the wind to come out. And when they don't come out, then we have to depend on the other sources like natural gas and nuclear to make up the difference. So the idea is to buy a bunch of batteries, and when the wind's blowing the right way and the sun's shining the right way, the excess energy gets stored in battery packs. And the problem with that is that you have to get the batteries and pay for them. And so that adds on to your bill. And we're seeing that here in Illinois in particular. And then the final area that people are looking at is healthcare. And the biggest issue there has been that as part of that stimulus program that he passed during COVID, what he did was he added an extra supplement to that plan. But he didn't want to have it be permanent, because then his budget would look like he was blowing out his budget. So he had it end at the end of 2025. And as part of the Big Beautiful Bill, the Republicans didn't extend that. So the issue there is that we're seeing a very large increase for a lot of people because their supplement has gone away. And a better description of that, or a more in-depth description of that, is we have our favorites from the New York Times are going to talk a little bit about what happened there.
Starting on November 1st, around 24 million Americans are going to start shopping for health insurance on the Affordable Care Act exchanges for next year. The government is currently shut down as Congress fights over whether or not to extend funding that help people pay for that coverage. If they don't reach a deal, all of those people are in for some serious sticker shock. So the original Obamacare passed in 2010, and it set up this system of income-based subsidies to help people buy their own insurance.
Millions of people will get tax breaks to help them afford coverage, which represents the largest middle-class tax cut for healthcare in history.
But over the years, a lot of people who they thought would sign up for insurance didn't, because it was too expensive. So during the pandemic, they extended these subsidies to lower the price of insurance for almost everyone who bought it.
This is considered one of the biggest things my administration can do: lower cost and expand coverage.
And then what happened was the enrollment started skyrocketing. It's basically doubled. Ironically, a lot of the new enrollment did not occur in states that Democrats govern. It happened in places that we think of as being more Republican. Signups have more than tripled in a bunch of southern states. These are places where there were a lot of low-income people who worked in the kind of jobs that didn't offer them insurance. They are also states that decided not to expand Medicaid under Obamacare, and so that meant that those low-income people didn't have access to any other kind of government program to provide their insurance. If the subsidies don't get extended, on average, the amount people are going to pay for their insurance is going to double. But under the hood of that kind of average increase, there's actually quite a lot of variation. For really low-income people, imagine someone making about $22,000 a year. That person doesn't pay anything towards their insurance now. If the subsidies expire, that person will have to pay $66 a month. For someone earning around $35,000 a year, their premium will go up by $132. And for an older person who's making a little more, say around $65,000, their premiums are going to go up from a couple $100 a month to maybe as much as a couple $1,000 in the most expensive markets. Even though a lot of Republicans continue to dislike Obamacare, they have also come to realize that this is a policy that benefits a lot of the people they represent. There are quite a lot of Republican lawmakers who
So what we found out is that during that process is that the Republicans didn't fix that issue. And so they didn't come up with an alternative. Some of that was because they couldn't get any votes from the Democrats to help them out. And the Democrats also wanted to make sure that they got maximum political gain by how they gamed any extension of that subsidy. When you look at what that reporter was talking about, one of the things she mentioned is that, well, those states didn't have Medicaid. Well, the people, because of the way that the Obamacare works, is those people still had nearly free health care even without Medicaid. I must have said Medicare, but Medicare or Medicaid, they didn't have that capability. So this is definitely something that Republicans should have addressed, but haven't, and is now going to be a campaign issue because there's that 12 million people who decided that because of the subsidies, they would now get an Obamacare policy, now are facing the increased price related to that. And a lot of those people didn't find out about it until they signed up for the program here in November and December of last year. And also when they do their taxes, they find out kind of how the program works, because all of a sudden they're getting extra expenses because they made more than they expected last year. So you'll see a lot of that happening as well. What can we do about housing? There are some bills that are out there about housing, but so far everything, for the most part, the housing issue is being done on the loan side in terms of increasing the limit on conventional loans so that people can afford to pay more for a house. So right now, a conventional loan ends at somewhere around $600,000, which in Central Illinois, that's a pretty nice house. But when you start to look at some of the more expensive areas, that's more of a middle class type house. So those limits haven't increased along with the price of the homes. The real issue is how to increase supply. And one of the things that they're going to do is looking at changing some of the regulations so that it's easier to get housing zoned in various locales. So here's an expert talking about what he thinks the various options are that could move the housing market along and help with affordability.
I don't think that affordability is going to go all the way back to a point where people feel like it's manageable. I think, everywhere we go, this is becoming more and more important of issue, and really the number one issue that relates to so many other issues in society. Dan Coakley, I'm a partner with PMG Affordable. We're a multifamily real estate developer, largely of affordable housing and mixed income housing on large scale projects.
I mean, so
I think it's not a
let me
realistic
read
benchmark.
that
I think
since
that the problem,
there's-
Mark, I think it's not housing on large scale projects.
sorry about that. Let me. So, in order for housing to go to pre-pandemic prices, interest rates have
I
to go
think
to,
it's not a realistic
interest rates would
benchmark.
have
I
to
think
drop to 2.5%. People's income would have to increase by 56%, or the houses would have to drop by 35% in pricing. Those aren't realistic expectations. So it's gonna be hard to get back to those affordability levels that we saw pre-pandemic.
that the problem in the housing market's a structural problem that's been going on for decades and decades and decades. So I think that, while it might appear that things were more affordable in 2019, this kind of march toward lack of affordability has been going on for a long time. And it's going to take a long time to make a dent in it. I think, that in the Realtor.com article, just how radical those moves would be with respect to interest rates or home price, depreciation or income, increases. It just shows you how much work we have to do. And I have to compliment, the Trump administration now for really putting this into bright focus, because I think it's going to be really, really necessary. And moving all of those levers as much as we can is going to be super, super important. You can't really point to one factor, whether it's interest rates or income or home prices, as to the determining factor around the affordability crisis that we have in this country. And I think increasing supply is probably one of the most important things we can do, and that the administration can kind of foster to help in this crisis. I think, the bond buyback program and the restriction on, massive, multinational private equity firms, soaking up huge amounts of housing supply should be something that, that politicians on both sides of the aisle should be able to support. I think those are the kind of big structural moves that actually, combined with other things, can actually move the needle. And actually, it just can be encouraging to people psychologically that they have an administration that understands what is fair and what is not fair.
So that's, that goes back to this whole idea is that I talked about earlier in terms of the chaos issue, is that a lot of these problems have been festering for decades and decades and decades. When you look at some of the old videos of Trump when he was in his 30s, talking about the issues of fair trade, at that time, the country that was probably taking most advantage of us was Japan. But the problems remain the same. The issue with Iran has been a problem that's festered since the late 70s. The drug war has been going on for as long as there's been human beings, basically. So you see these problems, and no one's really stepped forward to address them in any kind of realistic way. And that's the great thing about Trump, is that he's stepping in and trying to address these problems. The bill that's going through the Senate right now has me a little worried, just because Elizabeth Warren has jumped on that bill. So I'm wondering what the negative side to that bill is, that she would support it. But so far it looks like a pretty decent bill. Not that it's a panacea, as the expert was talking about, but it will have some positive impact going forward. And once it's in law, that's another issue, is that the next administration would have to pass a law to change it. Trump has done a few of these things through executive order, but that's, as you know, the next president that takes over can easily sign away those improvements. Finally, we'll talk a little bit more about the energy issue and where those expenses are. When you look at why are energy prices higher today, and what's causing that issue, you'll see a number of people talking about, well, there's all these new data centers that are being used to implement the new AI strategies. And while a lot of those are being developed, it's not clear that that's having a negative impact on pricing. And the reason for that is, and I'm very much an economist, and you always look at supply and demand, and you assume, well, if supply goes up, or if demand goes up without supply going up, you'll see a price increase. But in the case of the data centers and electricity, the issue there is a lot of the cost involved with generating electricity is fixed. What that means is you have the power lines, you have the plants, you have even wind and solar, as we talk about. All those are fixed costs. Doesn't matter whether you're generating 1 kilowatt of power or 0, those expenses are there. And so by having more people involved, you actually spread that fixed cost over more people, and so everybody pays a little bit less. And what's happening in the electricity business is that the variable cost of generating more power is less than the decline in fixed cost that's being assigned to each individual. So if you're seeing higher prices, it's because of something else other than generation. And even the Washington Post has mentioned that when you look at the transportation costs and the distribution costs, you'll see that the price of transmission is up 181% since 2005. The distribution is up 149% since 2005. Meanwhile, generation has actually dropped in price by about 35%. And quite frankly, I noticed this when I was, as you know, as an investor, I follow natural gas and some of the different commodities pretty closely. And I noticed that natural gas has not really moved much in terms of price over the years, but my bill keeps going up. And when I look through the bill, you see these transportation, transmission costs, things like that keep going up, but the generation price hasn't really gone up. And because of this fixed rate, that's the other part. And especially in Illinois, when you look at, the governor gets to decide who's on that board that's setting the prices on electricity. And so that's really important to have the right people who are looking out for the public when it comes to those prices. And so hopefully get a change in direction there. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, because of the dependence and focus on green energy, we've decided to add the battery tax to our bills. So there's another tax that has nothing to do with generation that's going up. But there are forces that are out there that want you to believe that the data centers are the whole reason. And a lot of that money that comes to fund that kind of thinking comes from China. And why would China be lobbying to do more green energy and why do they care about how we generate our power? Well, the reason is that when you look at the percentage of solar panels, the Chinese own about 80% of that market. They own a high percentage of the rare earths that go into that process. So for them, this is a money making. They've put all their eggs in one basket, and that basket is green energy. It's that, and now they're working on taking over the electric vehicle market as well. And because of the way that they're subsidizing their companies, some of those electric vehicle companies are basically using the carbon credits that they generate by producing that type of thing to sell to other companies and using that as their profit motive as opposed to making money on selling the cars themselves. And so that puts our car companies in jeopardy and isn't a really good thing, which is, again, going back to Trump's focus on fair trade. And we all want to have free trade, but we also want it to be fair. So it doesn't do you any good to have companies or countries cheating on these things and then us just standing back and accepting that as a process. So those are the main topics for today. We covered a lot of ground, and hopefully it was informative. And we look to see you again Tuesday. So make sure you follow us at the DPB show. We're on YouTube, Rumble, X. I even opened up my own account on Facebook. So if you want to contact me there, I'm available through that. So until next week, enjoy your weekend.